Welcome to episode 46 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing Arnold Rudnick. Arnold is a television writer. Over the course of his career, he sold several TV spec scripts, and we talk about how he did it. He's really got a ton of useful information for both TV writers and feature writers, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so it is very much appreciated. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. And then just look for episode number 46. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address, and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today, I'm talking with television writer Arnold Rudnick. Here is the interview. Welcome, Arnold, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Ashley. I'm glad to be here.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career and how you broke in.
Sure. That's probably a little more complicated than some. I guess because I have to think about which career, but since we're talking about writing, I moved out to California from the Midwest, knowing I wanted to work in film or TV, and pretty early on realized that writers control material, and I enjoyed writing and set a goal of that. While I was writing and learning to write, I worked in feature development at Paramount Pictures and worked with producers and got a really good introduction to scripts with the Paramount Story Department, and saw that pretty much every idea kind of has been written. And when I was working in feature development, I made the decision to focus on writing and television. And one of the first bits of advice I got when I moved out here, one of the best bits of advice, was from a television producer who asked me what I wanted to do. And, being new or young, I answered honestly, I want to work in film or television. And she looked at me and said, when you're talking to a television producer, you want to work in TV. And that really stuck with me as an answer, whatever your career is, to focus. Mm-hmm. After writing a bit, I teamed up with a partner that I went to college with, a friend of mine, and we made the decision to team up for at least a decade, because we by then understood that you're a product, you're a commodity, and an agent or a manager needs to market you. So even though you can write, whether it's books, television shows, scripts, or greeting cards, focusing gives the people who help you a handle of how to sell you. So we were a team, we were a sitcom writer team, and we wrote script after script. We did spec scripts for every, top show, and our first opportunity for a produced show was an episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was an amazing experience. We got the opportunity to pitch the show because my writing partner was on staff as a writer's assistant at the show. And that's its own story, how you break in to get those jobs, but it really does come down to who you know. But the good thing is that when you live in LA, you get to know the people you need to know.
Mm-hmm. Now, by this point, did you have an agent when you went in to pitch the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Oh, absolutely. We actually had an agent. We'd also been accepted to the Warner Brothers Comedy Writers Workshop, so it kind of was all at the same year. And the agent was, sending out our scripts, having 3 or 4 spec scripts that were written for existing episodes. By the time we got our Fresh Prince episode, we actually wrote an original pilot, and that's something you see more today, where an original pilot is a way of showing your voice. And with the changing landscape and shows having such structured arcs, it's hard to decide what to write a spec for, because you write a spec for a show and you can only use it until the producers kill off that character or gets them married. If you're writing for drama, you have to kind of not be counter to the existing show. And for your listeners too, something that I had heard and found to be absolutely true is, when you're writing specs for television shows, you're writing the absolute best script you can for that episode, and you're expecting it to absolutely never be made. And it's a little frustrating when you read it, but and friends of mine had read our specs and said, I saw that show on TV, because you want it to come off the page and be the voice of those characters. But for legal reasons, the producers of those shows are generally not going to be able to look at them.
So tell me about your agent. How did you guys even get those first beginning steps where you were able to get an agent?
That was sending out sample scripts. We worked with the WGA list. The Writers Guild of America has a list of agents who will accept new writers' material. And we've always, we're very proud to join the WGA and appreciate what they do to represent writers. And that if agents are working within that structure, no writer should ever pay to be read by an agent. All of those kind of warnings. So we ended up working with interviewing a few agents. And I think at the time we got our agent, let me correct myself, I think we signed with the agent while we were being accepted to the Writers' Workshop, and then we also got the Fresh Prince episode. It certainly helped that we could tell the producers at Fresh Prince, we have an agent to send our material over. That just shows we're serious about what we're doing. By the same token, our agent didn't get us that job. Many of the jobs we've gotten came through our outreach, our tenacity, our fans, but some of them came 100% through agents. We were staffed on New Addams Family, and that came strictly through our script being in a stack of dozens that were sent over to producers.
One quick thing I want to just go back to. You said you moved to L.A. Did you know anybody in L.A.? Because I think a lot of people are always fearful about just moving to a new city where they don't know anybody. Did you know anybody? What was that transition like?
That was a pretty exciting transition. My wife and I moved out together, and so I had a roommate, which was great. And when I moved out, we had family down in Whittier, so we stayed with them for 3 days till we found a place to live. And I did have a family friend. Everybody will probably find they know somebody at some level. And a family friend of ours was working in the industry, was an executive. He was at NBC and actually was the person who introduced me to the TV producer, gave me my lifelong advice. That led to a production job. That led to being a PA eventually. And that's an important thing, whether you're a writer or looking to break into the biz. I interviewed with the producer, and I sent him a thank you note. And the same advice you're going to read on What Color Is My Parachute or any college guide, I stayed in touch as I got my own job in the Paramount Accounting Department, as I moved up in, Paramount's, other divisions. I always stayed in touch with where I was. And when a job opened up and they needed a warm body to be a PA on a show, I actually got the call and got a job offer. And that, just like with writing, you're not going to get hired to write a show if you don't have all those specs ready to show. Not the promise of, I can write it if you hire me. You've got to be a writer before they hire you.
Now, just going back to the your story about getting that agent, when you say you got the WJ list, and this was in the mid '90s, early to mid '90s, so it's basically cold query letters at that point, no emails or anything like that. It's basically you writing a query letter, putting it in an envelope, stamping it, and sending it to the agent. Absolutely, and it's there's rules of thumb or numbers, and I like working with those. I've heard people tell me it's your 10th script that sells. And so you got to write and write and write, but that can't be the same script you rewrite 10 times. I heard it takes 100 rejections to get an agent,
Well, in our case, we were pursuing agents that we could get referrals to or that we knew were accepting. We had our body of work. So we would sit there and say, okay, well, this rejection counts for 10. So I think we had pursued maybe 6 to 8 agents, and we ended up, getting an agent. And it's great from a confidence standpoint. I think a lot of people are like, oh, once they get an agent, they're going to get me work. That's not the case. And in fact, getting an agent, I think, is easier, if that's a word I can use, as long as they understand that you've got to market yourself. You've got to reach out. You've got to talk to your fans. You've got to develop those fans by working with people, by talking with people, and have them appreciate your work. But it's not just talent. It's also the tenacity and the determination that you're going to stick with it, because they're going to be investing time in you, and they want to know that you're going to continue, beyond just writing one script and asking them to send it out.
Sure. Now, when you say you had your body of work, so you're sending out these cold query letters, how many scripts had you guys written at this point when you started approaching agents?
Oh, gosh. We had written a Seinfeld, a Roseanne, Mad About You. Mad About You, I think, is what got us the Warner Brothers Writers Workshop. That was our most recent script is always our best. I mean, we might have favorites before then, but because it embodies everything we've learned along the way, we had at least a half a dozen solid scripts, but we probably started reaching out to agents when we had about 3 or 4 solid ones.
Mm-hmm. Now, did the Warner Brothers workshop, was that like a part of it? Like, had you been accepted into that, and so that was fodder for your query letter, or just it happened? Because it seems like something like that would carry a lot of weight, and that might have been why these agents were interested in you, is that you'd been accepted to this Warner Brothers workshop.
You know what? I'm going to jump ahead because I honestly don't remember the timing of that. I should, and it's a really good question. If you want to follow it up sometime. It was kind of congruous because we'd put a lot of time in. I want to jump back and say, too, that when my partner and I agreed to team up, we had each written 3 or 4 scripts on our own that were pretty solid. So the reason I'm going to change my answer to that, because even if that was the catalyst to our first agent, we later were with agencies, and we had a 2-pilot deal with a cable company, and we had been with an agency representing us more in features, and we wanted the coverage in television, and we could not get the first agents we reached out to with a 2-pilot deal to take that and write the agreements for us. And in that case, we actually got representation at a pretty decent agency through a friend that I had developed at Paramount, and who was an agent there, and who, believed in us and believed it was worth, you'd think, I just need you to negotiate the deal on 2 pilots. And
I really think that's worth repeating, because I get people emailing me, and they've got a producer interested in optioning their script, but it's a $1 option, and they're like, oh, do you think an agent would be interested in me? And it's like, I think people fail to understand exactly how competitive things are. And if you had trouble, as you say, with a 2-pilot deal, finding a good agent, there's a long distance between that and a $1 option. So it's very difficult to get a good agent.
Yeah, and we did end up getting someone who was great and who we were with then for a while after, and but it wasn't what people assume, which is, I just have to make a call and they'll do this.
Yeah.
It takes work, and if it didn't take work, even more people would be doing it. It takes work, but that kind of makes it worthwhile too, and it weeds out people who maybe aren't really in it for the right reason. And what I would say is, you gotta love to write. If you're coming into Hollywood to be a writer to make money, then there's lots of other avenues to make a living. But if you
and they're much easier avenues to make a lot of money than screenwriting.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, it almost seems like whatever you want to do is the hard way to go, because you want it so much, and people end up falling into offers or opportunities, because they're maybe not trying so hard, and some of it is timing. Hollywood is definitely timing and luck, but it's not without preparation. You can't be in the right place at the right time without having identified, are you a sitcom writer? Are you a drama writer? Are you a feature writer? And when you say that, being able to back it up. We didn't call ourselves feature writers, so we had 3 or 4 written features, spec features to shop with an agent, and we didn't pursue that till after we had firmly done a body of work in television.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have a good idea of how you got that first pitch with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air producers. I wonder if you can just talk briefly about some of the other spec shows, because I know there's a lot of people out there that would love to get into that, to pitching and selling spec episodes. Maybe just looking at your resume, you have a Star Trek Voyager, Hope and Glory, Silk Stockings, Pacific Blue. Maybe you can just tell us how you sold some of those spec scripts.
Well, Star Trek Voyager was Star Trek has a reputation of being open. Like anybody can pitch to Star Trek, which was great. For me, it was personally rewarding because I was born on the same day that Star Trek was, that they premiered. And I'm not a Trekkie or a Trekker, but I learned that when I was working at Paramount Pictures, and I was involved in the feature team, the creative group, when they did Star Trek 6. And I was on the lot where the Star Trek offices were. And I went in and I made friends. And again, they were open to taking pitches because they need the material. And even now, with all the cable and Netflix, Amazon, different avenues, people need material, but people like to work with people they know. And so we had the opportunity to come in and pitch. We did a story. Star Trek Voyager was one of the more, it had some troubles during its production, finding its show. We loved working on it, having the opportunity. We didn't get a chance to write the script, and again, at that time, we hadn't written our television. We since wrote some our episodes, and those came through a fan from the Fresh Prince days and the other stuff, who just was an amazing mentor who gave us an opportunity. And when we were staffed on New Addams Family, we had that opportunity to meet with writers and assign some specs, which was a great thing for writers to know. While it certainly can be changing over time, the Writers Guild realizes that new writers have to get their start. And so they encourage, if not require, shows to have a certain number of episodes in a season be written freelance. It's hard to write freelance because you're not on staff, you're not in the room, you're not hearing what the plan is for a character and for an arc for the whole season, and all of these things that are designed to try and make sure viewers stay with the show and feel like they can't miss it. It's really great when you can pick up a show and just watch any one of them, and it doesn't matter if you didn't see the others, but that doesn't help the advertising, for network. And but they do bring in freelancers and give freelancers that chance. But that's I think it was like 3 scripts out of a 22 season or 21 season would be done by freelancers. And I had been working in features for a long time, so I loved the television model. The television model of a group of creative minds sitting in a room and kind of brainstorming together was, just thrilling, compared to features where you also had a writer after writer after writer, but they wouldn't be working on it together. One person would write the script, then they'd be replaced by somebody who was strong in story, then by somebody who was a dialogue, person. And television to me was faster, and was it's what I grew up on. It's why I wanted to work in entertainment. So having grown up watching, sitcoms and TV shows.
So when you say that a show like Star Trek Voyager, they would take pitches from anybody, what exactly does that mean? It was before a website, so obviously you wouldn't necessarily set up a pitch on a website, but did you have to have an agent? How did you facilitate that meeting?
Well, we actually had an agent, and we did get in and pitch, and we set up our meeting. Again, you're on a studio lot. What better way to meet people? So working, if you're living in Hollywood, somewhere, somehow, when you're working, you have the opportunity to meet people who are other writers that may be part of a group or some support team who are agents or managers. And I think one of the biggest things I could segue to a bit of advice is, don't have an attitude. I drive really careful in California because you never know who you may be cutting off if you don't. Same way with people in the industry. And don't think, oh, you're an agent's assistant. I want an agent, because that's how people become agents. They work as an assistant for an agent. And you're going to have a stronger, hungrier, champion in a young agent or agent's assistant than somebody who's got their client list of A-list writers and stars and directors who's grown up with them. So you're not pursuing the top agent at CAA Endeavor. Well, the names change of the agencies, ICM, but you're wanting to get somebody who is young, who's building a client list. You want to realize that when an agent picks up the phone to sell a writer, they're going to have a dozen writers to sell. And they may send over, like our agent did, they may send over a dozen writers for one assignment on a show. And you can't tell them, no, I'm the only sitcom team you can represent. Or they're just going to say, sorry, I can't represent you, because it's a numbers game for them to stay in business. But you're wanting them to at least get you in the door. And that's where it goes back to that luck and persistence, tenacity, and effort. Because at the end of the day, any one of these things, just like a job interview, everything you do, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a working relationship, an agent, you're trying to get your script in the door. Once they read the script, it's really up to you. And, a lot of people go to pitch events or pitch meetings, and, once a director or a manager or a producer says, okay, send me the script, just stop talking, because that's the best answer you can get. Nobody's going to hear you pitch and say, okay, we'll buy it. They're going to have to read it on the page. I think the biggest thing I'd want to segue there is, if you've got a great idea for a TV series, write it. The standard rule would be write for other shows, show you can write, work your way up as a staff writer, work to a producing level, then write your pilot when you've got a deal because you've been doing it. And that is how you need to do it. But if you start saying, let me pitch this, and you haven't written any television, people are, it's very hard for somebody to see that and know, well, how is this going to be realized? How are you going to do 100 episodes or even 22? So
let's dig into that a little bit more. That was definitely something I wanted to talk about, because I get a lot of emails from people that have literally zero professional writing experience, but they've written a script for an original series. And I usually tell them it's virtually impossible to sell that sort of an idea when they have no credits. I don't know that there's ever been a series created by a complete newbie, but maybe I'm being too harsh. And what sort of steps can they take if they don't have any writing experience? What can they do to try and get this original series off the ground? Is there anything? I mean, am I being too harsh, or do you have any ideas for them?
Well, you know what? I think answering that question today versus 20 years ago is a very different answer. If they've got an original script, they can possibly shoot it as a pilot presentation or a short. They can put it on YouTube. I know some reality shows have come from YouTube. I've seen the deals or read about the deals where shorts on YouTube lead to development deals, whether it's for the talent in front of the camera or behind. I think it's more of a performer's arena. But if you've got an original script, I think the question is, how good is it? And you need to have that support team, whether it's an agent or manager, a writer's group, friends. My partner and I teamed up because he and I would read each other's work, and we really would give each other's notes, and we saw and respected each other's work. We can do a whole show just on being a writing team if you want in the future, but it's really important that you team up with somebody that brings something to the script that you don't, but that you also team up with somebody who is going to have that like mind, both in work ethic and sensibility. And nowadays, if you've got an original pilot and it's amazing, you just got to have the right person read it. So whether your route is, working in offices and developing relationships and working for an A-list celebrity who gets a development deal and reads your pilot, that may be a business plan towards getting your writing made. It's a little less in your control. It's a little bit more of a circuitous route than being a writer and writing. And why you're writing existing shows is you want to show producers and network executives that you can deliver within the confines of an existing show. So one of the important things we should say that I imagine everybody listening has heard or may know, but if not, and even if they are, it's good to be reminded, you want to write for a show that everybody knows. If you like a show that's, on the fringe, it's a great show, but it's not getting the ratings or not everybody's watching it, and you send that as your spec, it's not going to help the producers who don't know the show to read that. Mm-hmm. Because they're not going to know if you've captured the voice of Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. Another piece of advice is when you write your spec script, write for the show's existing characters. When I've given advice to people and read their scripts, so many of them have an incredible story for a guest actor on the show. So if they were going to do a Big Bang spec, because Big Bang is one of the top shows, and they write it, but they introduce a new character who's not part of that universe, and that character is vital to the plot, then they're not really doing anything to show how they can do under structure. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're not going to turn on the TV next week and see exactly that type of story, but you're held to a different standard when you're writing a spec. And it's not okay. Good enough isn't. You have to write a spec, and it's been described to me, every word has to be gold. Because you are trying to take those words and turn them into money. You're trying to turn them into value. And, so you need to make sure you've captured the voice of the characters in that show. It's very hard for an executive to read an original pilot and know if you've done that, because it's up to you to be creating those characters. So
let's talk about that for a minute. There's a what kind of a mix a writer should have. As you mentioned earlier, it used to be in the 90s, everybody said don't write original stuff, just write specs. And now that seems to be the word on the street is you need a couple of original shows just to show your voice. What sort of a mix does a new writer have, would you say? 2 or 3 original pieces, 2 or 3 specs?
I think that would be great. I think, yes, you want to have a really great spec, and you're asking people to take time to read your script. So you're not going to send them over 6 scripts to read. You're just send them 1. And you don't want to waste their time. You want to send them the very best one you've got. But then when they say, send me something else, you want to follow up with something as good, if not better. And somewhere in there, I think you could introduce the fact that you've also got an original script. I think it depends on who you're talking to. When you're talking to a producer looking for television product, you've got your original script. When you're talking to an agent looking at them representing you as a writer, you want to make sure they understand, you know the rules. And you're going to play by the rules. You can break them, but kind of like that conversation that I remember, it's who you're talking to that you want to. You're not being dishonest, but you're being directed and focused. And what I would say is whether you're writing 3 or 6 projects, write in the same genre and field at first. I'm a total believer in if you can write comedy, you can probably write drama. And if you can write half-hour sitcoms, you can probably write hour shows too. But you really want to make sure that you've mastered one of those and before you move on.
So let's talk about your career, how it's evolved over the last few years and what you're doing today, both in the entertainment industry and out. I think that's kind of an interesting, I think it'll be interesting for people to hear kind of what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I was writing spec television while working in feature development and loving kind of the balance. When I did write full-time, that was great too. I on a show, but when I was not on a show and I was writing full time, it took me full time. When I've been working in an office or working in a job, it helps me manage my time more and focuses my time because it becomes more valuable. So after writing a bit, I worked with a partner for a number of years, and he moved back to the Midwest, and we're still working on some features together, a great friend, but that gave me an opportunity to kind of reinvent my voice, and I wrote a middle grade book. I wrote ESP, Sixth Grade Sense, which was fun. I had kids. I wanted to spend time with them. I was at school book fairs, and so that gave me the opportunity and an outlet for my love of writing. I did have a backup plan. I wanted to make it a TV show, and actually got a call about the rights a couple of years later, and I'm still working on that to be a project. But while writing, I've also worked in business, in accounting, and I had that as a backup, or as a skill set. When I moved out here, I had combined accounting with film as my studies, and it's something that always helped me pay the bills and also gave me, again, that opportunity to delve into my writing, even when it would sometimes take a long time. It takes a while for agents and producers to read things. I've had people read feature scripts, which I did move on to more, especially with my partner when he was no longer in Los Angeles. If I can back up a bit, a lot of people want to live outside LA. They want to work in entertainment. Things move. YouTube, Netflix is definitely an equalizer in the business. But if you want to write in Hollywood television, you've got to live in Hollywood. You've got to be here just because of the nature of the job, the way stories are put together, especially in sitcoms even more. So I think people have an idea that when you sell that first script, you're home free and everything else you can ever do is going to sell. And all you have to do is read the trades about, a project Spielberg was trying to make, or a project that took Clint Eastwood 15 years, and you realize that everybody has to work at getting things made, and the process itself is just requires continued effort and that luck and that timing, and so for a writer, it's very hard to be in a position where you're paying all your bills based on a writer's income. And I made the decision I wanted to be an artist, not a starving artist. So I've continued to work. I've always wondered if I needed to pay the bills more by a script, would I have written a few more? But I've liked what I've chosen. I've liked what I've worked on, and enjoyed the projects. The kids' books, after writing ESP, I was invited to classrooms and had younger ages wanting to have something I can speak about. So I wrote a kids' book called Little Green about a frog who wants to be special. And it's become a passion project of mine with literacy and working with nonprofits and charities. That's really rewarding. And I got into television because I wanted to reach a large audience and change the world with positive messages. So it's kind of neat to be able to do that in other ways.
Yeah, I'm curious about the book. One thing that I probably get it the opposite direction. I get a lot of emails from people who they're novelists or they've written a book, maybe a children's book, but mostly it seems to be novelists, and they're emailing me saying, I want to get my novel turned into a movie, and how can I go about doing that? And one of the things I worry about is that they're basically, most of them have self-published a novel. It hasn't been a great success, and I just worry that they're trading one very difficult thing, which is making their novel a success. They're trading that for another very difficult thing, which really isn't their full passion of trying to get a movie made, which is equally as difficult. And there's some truth that they can get the movie made, it will help generate sales on the novel end, but I just worry that they're going to end up really dividing their time and diluting the efforts that they make. Does that ever worry you that, you're spending time on something that may not, you are diluting yourself? As you say, you probably could have written a bunch more specs if you hadn't written the book.
That's a really great question and perspective on it. And I think it extends even beyond what you've pointed out too. I work with a lot of filmmakers who make independent features, and they're looking at a theatrical release solely because they need it in order to finance the DVD and cable and network, and they won't get as much foreign sales if it didn't have a theatrical release. There are filmmakers who self-fund and make their own films, never to find a distributor. So while the world's changing, I wish I had the technology out there today when I was in film school. I'm amazed to see now my son's 20 at UCLA, and I'm amazed to see the projects that he's been doing, and we've actually written a feature script together and a TV pilot. But basically, for me, I find that having everything I said about focus, the more I write, the better I write. And even when I was writing the television specs, I was writing letters to my grandma and coverage of feature script and stories, and using words and evoking feelings is a learned process. The more you do it, the better you get. From a standpoint of focus, to clarify, I'm really suggesting that people who know you need to know what you want so you can map out how you're going to get there. And if you know you want to be a TV writer, then you got to focus on those TV scripts first. And for me, I made the decision when my partner moved away, and television was like, okay, I can pursue TV, knowing the hours and knowing my goals for family and things. I can pursue TV by writing a whole new body of independent specs, because every single thing I wrote and every credit I had was Arnold, Rudnick, and Rich Hosek. Wonderful talent, great friend, but it wasn't Arnold Rudnick. So everything we talked about doing, I would have to do for myself again. And that's why I was saying, too, I would say anybody contemplating teams, people work with different partners for different reasons, but you definitely want to go into that with an understanding of what it means and what you're creating. And I made the choice, instead of, writing 3 or 4 new specs as an independent writer, to delve into that book world for a couple of reasons. It was a lot more on my own time, my own control, and because it gave me that outlet to get it into the hands of children to read. And I love that access. We've got a few feature scripts that have only been read by Hollywood executives. And it would be wonderful if those stories could be read wider. They may never get made. We're certainly still pursuing avenues, and sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's an attachment. But there's so many great things in Hollywood that don't get made for their own reasons. So for me, writing the books ended up inspiring me towards other avenues of writing, and along the way I have also continued working on features. And writing, I realized at a certain point in there, when I started putting it on my tax return that I'm a writer, that's what I've always wanted to be. As a kid, I wanted to be an author. And so whatever form I do it in for me now is great. But I would definitely say, for someone new who's sending you a book and saying, I want this to be a screenplay, I think that's actually a great way to get their idea into a book format, to reach out to producers. I've got a published book available on Amazon, self-published or not, because, a lot of great publishers, a lot of great authors are self-published, to say, I've got a book. But if they want it turned into a screenplay and they want to be screenplay writers, they just need to write it. If they're saying, I'm going to send my book out, and even if a producer reads it and says, I love this, we want a script for it, what are they going to send the producer to show that they can write a film script?
I think I say it's a 50-50, but some of them are willing to sit there and write the script, but a lot of them are hoping that they can find a producer who will hire the screenwriter and pay the screenwriter to turn it into a script. That's
a great avenue towards getting their material sent out. And as a book, I believe more producers, managers, executives will take a look at a book than they will a script. And the reason is legal. When your book is available on Amazon and open for people to read, the accessibility of it is already evidenced. When you have a script, the reason Hollywood demands an agent, and some people use lawyers and managers are great too, the reason an industry professional is required is because there is how do I say this? The phrase "great minds think alike" is true, and there's not as much original stuff as most people are going to assume. My education in the Paramount Feature Story Department was every time I started writing a feature script, a spec would come in from an agent, coverage would be attached to it, and it would be a log line, so I would shelve that project because it would be similar to something I had started writing. And that, again, is why, to avoid conflict of interest, to avoid a kind of creative quagmire, if that's the right word, is why I decided to focus on TV. And then while I was focusing on TV, my friend from college, we'd make short films together. He moved out, together we decided to write together.
Mm-hmm.
So,
have you written a script for your book, your ESPP?
I have not. That's a really great question, and given my goals with it, it's probably something I should consider doing. I'm also open to someone else interpreting it on that level. One of the producers asked me that when it was under option twice actually, and one of the producers asked me, would I have to be attached as a writer? And I would love to. The only difference for me is I do have a body of work that I can show as a writer, and part of that includes Rich Hosek and I, who've written together for years. We're working on a feature project right now, and if we had the opportunity to do this as a TV show, I would be thrilled to work with him again. Or now I've got a sample script with my son, one of the greatest writing experiences I've had. It was just fun. No money from it yet. I hope it sells, but as a writer, you start realizing that success in writing cannot be defined by the payment. Because if you're waiting for payment, again, you're not going to find the satisfaction in writing, I don't believe.
Now, you said you got this book has been optioned 2 times. Was it a self-published book, or did you have an author, or an editor and a publisher?
It is, and self-publishing is something that I am. I'm actually, as I said, have a background in business and accounting, and I started Paraphrase LLC as a boutique publishing company, and I'm actually in works on a couple projects to publish for other authors, and looking for other projects to publish. But I've gone through my learning curve as far as access to selling of books, the marketing, which everything comes down to marketing, whether it's a TV show on the network to a feature in the theaters. So I guess it's self-publishing right now, because right now the only 2 titles were written by me. Little Green, which is about a frog asking, "Isn't it possible?" has become my mantra, because, almost anything is possible when you start mapping out the way to get to it. And I hope that kids all over someday will know "Isn't it possible" the same way that I think I can was a catchphrase from The Little Engine That Could. And I was thrilled when I learned that The Little Engine That Could was self-published by a guy named Arnold. Waddy Piper was his pen name. And, I chose not to use a pen name because it felt a little more honest. And because I always wanted to be author. I wanted my name on a book. So it's...
So what did you do to get them optioned? It just was self-published, and you've sold enough copies that somehow a producer got it and called you up and wanted to option it?
Absolutely. Paraphrase has its own business line and its own email, and one of the greatest moments of my life was when I got that email that I used to send from the Paramount Motion Picture Group to check on book rights, saying, "Dear sir, are the film rights available to this book?" And I reach back out. I'm very upfront with people about the reach and the sales and the purpose of the book, the message of the book. In the case of one case, it was a friend, an actor who loved the book, had read it and recommended it to a producer. And in the other case, it was a producer who had read it, had run across it.
Just randomly. He just randomly ran across it on Amazon or whatever.
On Amazon or from somebody else. I've sold books through schools. I've donated books through nonprofit charities promoting literacy. Fortunately, the books are are something that I'm not looking to pay the bills with the sales of books. Most book writers are not, other than J.K. Rowling and Twilight and that handful, most book writers are not making a living writing their books. And I think it's important to not, that there's no get-rich-quick schemes anywhere. There are certainly avenues towards a quicker salary or a quicker income, and I think Hollywood is for people who enjoy creating, and that the finance is not the main direction, because if it is, you're going to get worn out much sooner than you will accomplish your goal. A TV producer, a TV producer I met, another bit of advice I was given early on. 3 of them were, the first one, when you're talking to a television producer, you want to work in TV. The second one was, whatever you want to do, give it 10 years. In 10 years, you'll be doing what you want, but that means being focused. And the third was that if you want to be a writer, kind of similar, it's your 10th script that will sell. So, maybe those are tricks towards not giving up, but it's also not wrong to decide it may not be for you, and deciding, I don't want to be doing this. And if you don't, then there's so many other avenues and ways of working that you could look into. But if you write and you love to write, then there's a host of ways to get in.
I wonder, as someone who's an experienced TV writer, was there anything going into writing these books that, maybe your experience as a TV writer helped you make them seem more, television-y or filmy, just plotting them out or something? Because it just, and maybe that helped you actually option them. I wonder if there's anything,
Absolutely. Well, I think it goes both ways. Again, writing is a learned process. A great trend executive I know had told me early on, everyone's on their own timetable, but if you stick with it, you can learn it. If I think the character, when you deal with sitcoms especially, and television in a broader sense, it does come down to character and voice. And I think that's something that I enjoyed infusing in ESP and Little Green, and I think that helps the reader follow along in much more of a visual way. I think storytelling in general is pretty similar. When you get into the experimental storytelling, then anything's fair game. But if you're doing traditional narratives, beginning, middle, and end, and character building, then whatever format you're writing in, having that structure in there, I think appeals to readers. And in the case of ESP, I think it did help producers read it and see how it could be a television property, a feature TV property.
Perfect. So what's the best way for people to contact you? You had mentioned the website for your publishing. You can mention that if you're on Twitter. Maybe mention your Twitter handle, and I can link to all that in the show notes.
Absolutely. I'm just getting started on Twitter. New technology to learn. I'm at Arnold Rudnick, no spaces, ARNOLD RUDNICK. I also have a Twitter for Little Green, and that's at Isn't It Possible? No punctuation, just ISNT, ITPOSIBLE. And then I have websites for Little Green is www.isn'titpossible.com. And for ESP, it's www.espete.com. ESP.com. Perfect. And I will, as I said, I'll put all that in the show notes so people can click on over there and learn more about that. Arnold, you've been very generous. This has been a great interview. As I said, I haven't done a lot of TV writing, so I don't know that much about it. I've learned a lot. So this was really great. I appreciate your coming on the show. Again, really appreciate you having me. And I've been helped by some wonderful, wonderful people and want to be able to repay that. If you're looking for an in-depth analysis of your screenplay by an industry veteran, I work with several script consultants. Check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. All the consultants listed on that page have years of experience actually working in the entertainment industry. Right now, we have a real working producer who will give you notes on your script and 2 screenwriters with actual screenwriting credits. These guys are real pros, not gurus or professional consultants. They are people who actually work in the business. So
If you're looking for some high-quality notes on your current screenplay, check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. So I just wanted to touch on something that Arnold said. Arnold gave out a lot of practical information for TV writers, and I think a lot of what he said could be applied to feature writers as well. As I mentioned in the interview, I get a lot of emails from people who have never worked as a professional writer, but they've written a pilot for an original show. I really agree with what Arnold said here. In this day and age, it's relatively cheap and easy to go out and shoot something and put it on YouTube. I've been talking about this over the last few episodes, but I really believe that just getting out there and taking action is the best thing you can do for your career at any level. So I'll just end on that note. Really start to think about how you can produce one of your scripts yourself. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.